within the Islamic law to scrutinize the actions of the ruler, to hold him to account, to speak out against him. So again, I don't buy that argument that because you're talking about Islamic law, you're turning the people into kind of drones. We're just, the ruler said to do this. Why? I don't know. He just told us to do it, so we're going to follow. So I think the image that maybe people would derive or understand what this system would offer is actually far distant to what its reality would be.
Regarding minority rights under Shari'a law, for example, the Coptic Orthodox Church within Egypt, I was just wondering, do you think that minorities will be able to flourish? Because we know, understand that the Christians there were allowed to flourish, they were allowed to trade. I mean, there was no persecution whatsoever. They loved it under his rule. But we also know that under certain other rules, they were persecuted. And but what my question is would be, do you think that minorities will be better represented under Shari'a law or under a democratic state? And that's directed to Mr. Jamal Deen.
Okay. In terms of the issue of the status of minorities,
yeah.
Again, I would say that if you look at the Shari'a law, how it deals with the issue of the minorities, in their personal issues, i.e. in terms of worships and so on, they are left to choose their own course of worship and actually follow their own religious practices. So those are not interfered with, and their places of worship are guaranteed as well. They have the right to exercise,
So kind of leading to what that guy said, in Egypt, how would that, there's about 8 to 10 million.
Yeah, so again, so their right to worship and their right to not be interfered with in their worship would be guaranteed under Sharia. And that's something that is actually quite consistent through the Islamic history. As you gave the example of Salahuddin,
yeah.
We know the example of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which today still its gates are opened every morning by the Husseini family, isn't it? Members of that family, because that was a tradition established by Salahuddin to show that the rights of the Christians would be protected after the withdrawal of the Crusaders, after the Crusaders were defeated. So that was a symbol of how the non-Muslims were dealt with. And you can actually look at other scholars such as Marcel Boissard, such as Richard Boulier, who talk about the status of non-Muslims within Islamic society and address the fact that, first of all, they had their own court system to deal with issues, but so they had their own court system to deal with their disputes. So, for example, marriage cases, divorce and so on. They're not forced to abide by Sharia in these issues. They can actually access their own courts on these personal status issues.
The tax system?
Yeah? Okay, I'll come to this point as well. But in terms of the issue of their right to actually be judged by their own laws, this was permitted and it was allowed under the Muslims. And you actually find in some cases, non-Muslims, as Richard Boudier in his book, The Case for Islamo-Christian Civilization, he talks about the fact that many times non-Muslims, if you look at the court records of the Islamic State, you would find that non-Muslims were coming to the Islamic courts because they had a preference for the Sharia as a basis for judging their disputes compared to their own institutions. So that was actually, as he notes, as Amnon Cohen as well, another a rabbi who actually notes in a book he wrote in '94, about actually looking at the records, the judicial records of the Islamic State, you find this tradition where non-Muslims were able to access its legal system, and they were actually dealt with in a way that was not arbitrary, it was actually giving them their rights. Hence, they, out of their own volition, were accessing its courts.
Yeah, I'm quite embarrassed. I'm probably the only one, or the one who knows least about this topic at all. So I'm here to learn, and in order to learn, I need some contrast, and to provoke that kind of contrast. Now, I wonder whether a question for Mr. Deen, whether Allah, when he wrote the Sharia, as I think it's right, yeah, was he maybe driven by utilitarian ideas?
I greatest happiness of the greatest number.
Well, yeah. So, like, best, right?
Well, we understand that the Sharia, and as the verse of the Quran says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, that the Prophet was not sent except as a mercy to mankind. So we understand that the laws of Islam are for the benefit of humanity. They actually advance and move humans forward. But at the same time, we understand that that framework and that system it's not always assessed that each benefit and every rule has to be assessed, how much does that benefit me? How much does that benefit all of the society? I.e., the personal benefit that I can access from that rule. Because benefit and mercy, in our view, is in this life and in the akhirah as well, in the afterlife. Yeah? So the fact is that man is addressed with a system that he should believe in and follow, because it guarantees his success in both this life and the next. So from our point of view, the basic belief we have about the system that Islam has brought is that submission and following that system is for the best for man in this life and the next.
In that way you would say yes?
Okay, but again, in terms of utilitarianism, the idea is that we can assess, each person can assess himself what is the best law, what is the best outcome from each and every law. And that's why when you look at an issue like, for example, life and death, you can make a decision on that based on your own subjective view of what is the best outcome in that situation. You can make a decision.
I just don't know enough about utilitarianism that I didn't understand it that way. I mean, you have a leader who is a utilitarian and he's not concerned about his own benefit, but he's concerned about the benefit of everyone.
Okay.
That way it's always, broader prospects. No purely egoistic motivation of utilitarianism idea, or is there? I mean, maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, but again,
You're right.
you may be correct in one interpretation, but again, the issue is that you're attempting to maximize the utility. And as I mentioned before, I gave the example of many different situations where utility, i.e. what's going to benefit the most amount of people, is impossible to judge. Because I gave examples where in one action someone says this is beneficial, he says this is going to... Yeah, so...
Allah,
yeah, so...
favor in designing the perfect system, because we can't do it because we're not humans. Is that right?
Yeah, so effectively, just to answer it again, version 4 of the question. So what I'm saying effectively is, it still comes back to saying, are we saying utilitarianism is the ultimate basis to judge or not? Now I'm saying that the Islamic law, the Islamic system is for the benefit of man to follow in this life and the next life. I.e. that actually believing in a system and adopting it is a decision that is good and beneficial for man. What we're saying with utilitarianism, when you look at the point of view of each individual, or if you look at the point of view of the ruler, is that he can assess himself what's going to be the most benefit for the society. And as I said, because benefit or the perception of what's beneficial can change within the individual from time to time and place to place, and for a group of people, for judging what is beneficial for others, that can vary as well. I view it as beneficial for him, he views it as negative and actually harmful. Because that view shifts and changes from time to time and place to place, from person to person, it's impossible to set that as a basis for man to judge and actually arrive at a correct judgment.
From what I gather, secularism and Sharia. Secularism is like a system based on trial and error, yeah, with the main thing being error, then having to learn from it. Yeah. Sharia seems to be a system which has come from God, which is constant, which has the solutions for man, and it can be applied fully, and it can function in a stable society. Now, is it time, this is just generally, I want both speakers' views on this really, is it time, in light of secularism's failure, and the failure of Western models in the Muslim world, in the Islamic world, all around the world, their failure, is it not time to implement? Is it time to implement a more constant system such as Sharia in these lands?
No point in talking about failure when they haven't been tried.
Sorry?
There's no point in talking about failure when they haven't been tried.
So you're saying that the Western models of...
There is not an Islamic country that's had any kind of sustained democratic rule at all.
Sorry?
There is not an Islamic country, predominantly Islamic country, that's any kind of sustained, stable, democratic, legal, utilitarian system. Not one, not close. So how can it fail when it's never been tried?
I disagree with you on whether it's not been tried.
Well, which one then?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that in the Muslim world, in the Islamic world, you've had the imposition, you have the tried through colonialism, etc. You've had the tried.
The colonialists, sorry, that's to totally misunderstand colonialism. The French colonialists did try that. The British never did. The one rule in the British thing is, you know, we're here for certain purposes. We do not mess about with people's religion, local way of life. That's why the British Empire was relatively peaceful, relatively successful. Well, it was. I mean, frankly, and a lot of places would be a lot better off if they were still in it, but that ain't going to happen.
Yeah, it's
okay. So the question you asked about the imposition of, or which system to follow after the failure of secular values. I think, again, if we look at the issue of judging what would be the best system to have in the society, you would find, if you look at different models in the Islamic world, you found people attempting to implement and attempting to follow Western models of government. So if you look, for example, in Turkey, there is a case of a country that made very sustained attempts to implement a Western model over 80 years, and obviously...
Swiss legal system.
Well, Swiss legal system, yeah. So again, I think that was 1920, 1922 that they adopted the Swiss Penal Code. Actually before, even in the early 20th century. And you would find after that period that there was a sustained model, you know, as the Kemal model, Mustafa Kemal, was the 6 arrows of Kemalism. And they were built on Western philosophy, secularism, nationalism, I can't remember all 6. But the key point was, it was about separating religion from the state, and the state being able to judge what was beneficial based on a model that we would take our people forward with no reference to religion. Now,
and
again,
26 Muslim countries, I'd say Turkey was the most successful,
okay,
the nicest to be in.
Okay, except for someone who wants to practice Islam, I guess that would be
no, plenty of people practice Islam.
Okay, but, well, depending on how you define practice
they don't
Islam,
get to enforce it on everybody else.
Or even to wear hijab and go to university as well, yeah? Or into a government building, or to a hospital.
Yeah, okay. Well, in any republic, you have to limit people's...
Okay, so you have to limit.
Expression.
So again, exactly. So now we come back to, there was a valid attempt. This is the point. You said there was no valid attempt to implement Western models. Now you're saying that there has to be some limits. Now these countries, the rulers in those countries will argue, we had to follow the limits. You know, you always say this, we're in a tougher neighborhood, we're in a tough environment. So because of that, the efforts we need to make to achieve the overall benefit for our people are more stringent than elsewhere. So this is a constant argument you'll find. If you look, for example, Musharraf in Pakistan, this was his argument. Okay, the West, you criticize him at this point and that point, but I'm actually taking this country forward in the best way possible. And obviously, you'll find many people did support Musharraf. Yeah, he had a lot of support, not just from Western governments who were in it for the money, or however you look at it, but many people in the broad society, political thinkers, diplomats and so on, would say that what he did was good for Pakistan. People in Pakistan don't view that to be the case. But overall, it was judged that that is what he's doing, he's sincere. He's sincere in his attempts to take that country forward. And yourself only about 20 minutes ago,